Maya, I think it's time we had a serious conversation about your future here. Those words from Rachel, my manager, hit me like a bolt of lightning. My heart skipped a beat as I sat across from her, not expecting anything close to what was about to unfold. For 5 years, I had poured my soul into this company, Reverie Marketing. I had been loyal, committed, and always ready to go the extra mile. But now, sitting in Rachel's cold, sterile office, I felt the ground beneath me start to crack. I had been called into this meeting thinking it was just another routine check-in, another discussion about the next big project or strategy. But as I sat there, the tension in the air was palpable. Something was off, something that didn't sit right. Rachel's eyes, usually sharp and calculating, now seemed distant. I could feel my pulse racing as she started speaking again. "You're being let go, effective immediately," she said flatly, not even a hint of empathy in her voice. Her words were like ice water, splashed across my face. I froze, unable to process what I was hearing. Fired, just like that. No warning, no discussion about my performance or future goals, nothing. I had been blindsided. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. What do you say when your entire career, your entire life at a company, gets flushed down the drain in a single moment? I tried to keep my voice steady, my hands gripping the armrests of the chair as I looked at her, trying to make sense of the situation. Rachel's expression remained unchanged, almost mechanical. She gave me no reason, no explanation for this decision. "You just don't fit with the direction we're moving in," she said, as if that vague statement was all the justification she needed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask why. Why now? Why me? But all I could do was nod and sign the termination papers she handed me. I had worked so hard, put in long hours, sacrificed so much for this company, and now it was over. Just like that. As I stood up to leave, the weight of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. I was no longer a part of the team. I was no longer important to Reverie, and that hurt. It hurt more than I had ever imagined. I walked out of her office in a daze, feeling the eyes of the other employees on me, their whispers cutting through the air. I could sense the curiosity, the judgment, but there was nothing left to say. I didn't know where to go from here. I didn't know how I was going to explain this to anyone. I had been loyal. I had given everything to this job. But now it felt like none of that mattered. And the worst part? I had no idea why. I thought I was safe, thought that if I kept doing my job well, everything would work out. But instead, I found myself here, out the door, without warning. As I packed up my things in a daze, I tried to make sense of what had just happened. I had always been upfront with Rachel about my frustrations, my desire for more recognition, for a raise, for opportunities. But it seemed like all that had done was put a target on my back, and I couldn't shake the feeling. This wasn't just about my performance. No, this went deeper than that. Rachel knew I had been quietly searching for another opportunity. I had confided in a few close colleagues about my frustration with the lack of career growth at Reverie. They all understood. I wasn't the only one feeling undervalued, but apparently, Rachel saw it as an act of disloyalty, a betrayal even. As I walked out of the office building for the last time, the cool air hit my face, but it couldn't shake the numbness I felt inside. I wasn't just leaving a company, I was leaving behind a piece of myself. But I also knew, deep down, that this wasn't the end. Something had to change. And I wasn't going to let this be the last chapter of my story. It wasn't until later that day, as I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the termination papers Rachel had handed me, that the full weight of what had happened began to sink in. I had always believed in the importance of hard work and loyalty. Reverie Marketing had been my second home for over 5 years. I had put in countless hours, given up personal time, and consistently delivered results. And yet, I had been tossed aside without so much as a conversation about my future. My mind raced, trying to piece together the events that had led to this. Sure, I had been frustrated with my career progression, the lack of recognition, and the failed promises of raises and promotions. But was that really enough for me to be let go? especially after all these years of service. I had to know more. I needed answers. The next few days were a blur of confusion, self-doubt, and endless questions. I started reaching out to people within the company. Colleagues I had worked with, those I had trusted, were now my only source of clarity. And the more I dug, the more I began to see a pattern, one that I had missed in all the years I had been so dedicated to my job. It turned out Rachel knew about my job search. It wasn't something I had kept a secret. I had confided in a few close colleagues about my frustration, about how I had applied for a few positions elsewhere, hoping to find something that valued my skills and offered growth. But I never imagined that my search would be seen as a betrayal. I had assumed that companies, like people, understand the need for career progression. But Rachel? She saw it as a threat, a sign of disloyalty. She had been watching me, tracking every move I made, and it was then that I realized my search for something better, something that would finally value me, was the true reason for my termination. It wasn't about performance. It wasn't about the work I had done. It was about my desire to leave. Rachel had always made it clear that loyalty to the company was paramount, and it seemed she expected absolute commitment from me, even if that commitment meant sacrificing my career growth, my worth, and my happiness. I had always hoped that my dedication would be reciprocated, that eventually my hard work would be recognized. But instead, it had been used as leverage, a tool to exploit my time and energy without offering the rewards I had earned. As I sat there processing the betrayal, I realized that the company I had once trusted was no longer the place I had believed in. It was a place where loyalty was expected, but not given. A place where employees were expected to give their all without ever receiving the same in return. But what struck me the most was how subtle it all was. There had been no explicit conversation about my search for a new job. No one had ever said, "Maya, we need to talk about your loyalty." Instead, it was a quiet, insidious shift. A change that I didn't notice until it was too late. I had been naive, thinking that my hard work and dedication spoke for themselves. But now, as I reflected on everything that had happened, I saw the truth. My termination wasn't just a consequence of me searching for a better opportunity. It was the company's way of teaching me a lesson about loyalty, control, and the price I paid for expecting recognition. And that was when I decided I wasn't going to let them get away with it. It didn't take long for the shock of losing my job to wear off. A few sleepless nights, some tears, and the steady stream of messages from colleagues asking if I was okay. All reminders of the abrupt end to my career at Reverie. But it wasn't long before something clicked inside me. It was time for a change. A real change. Something that would give me the respect I deserved. I had already accepted an offer from North Bay Solutions, a company that had seen my potential before I had even left Reverie. North Bay had a reputation for valuing its employees, for fostering growth, and for being a place where loyalty wasn't just expected, but earned. I had always felt like I was stuck in a cycle at Reverie, but North Bay offered something different. A fresh start, a real opportunity to make a difference. I remember my first day like it was yesterday. Walking into the sleek modern office, I felt like a stranger, but in a good way. This was different from the cold, corporate environment I had been in for years. I wasn't walking into a company that was just about numbers and deadlines. I was walking into a place where people mattered. David, my new boss, was warm and welcoming from the start. He made sure that everything was set up for me, an office with a door, a technology setup that was actually functional, and even a welcome basket with a note that said, "We're glad to have you on board." It was a simple gesture, but it meant so much. At Reverie, I had never been given such an enthusiastic welcome. In fact, I had never been given a welcome at all. As I sat in my new office, the weight of the past few weeks slowly lifted. I was finally in a place that recognized me for my skills and abilities, not just for what I could do for the company. I felt a sense of relief, like I could finally breathe again. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could move forward, not just professionally, but personally as well. At 9 a.m. sharp, David came by to introduce me to my new team. 5 brilliant marketing specialists, each with their own expertise, and each eager to get started. I could already tell that these were people who were passionate about their work, and more importantly, they were people who respected each other. This was the kind of environment I had longed for, one where collaboration and support were at the core of everything. David didn't waste time. After a brief introduction, he immediately asked me to join him in the conference room for a meeting with the executive team. It felt a little surreal, stepping into that conference room. But David had prepared me. He told me that they were re-evaluating their relationship with Harbor Point, and they wanted my input. After all, I knew their account better than anyone. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent years managing that very relationship, and now I was being asked for my professional opinion on whether or not we should continue working with them. I could have been petty, could have let the emotions of the past few days cloud my judgment. I could have easily suggested cutting ties with Harbor Point, the company that had treated me so poorly. It would have been the perfect revenge. But instead, I took a deep breath and reminded myself of the bigger picture. This was about professionalism. This was about making the right decision, not just for me, but for North Bay. I told David and the team that we should evaluate Harbor Point on the same criteria as any other potential partner. I made it clear that while their work had been solid in the past, the consistency of their account management was a major concern. And with that, the conversation shifted from personal vendettas to a more objective analysis of business needs. This was the kind of decision-making I had been longing for: clear, rational, and above all, fair. Little did I know that one conversation would set the tone for the next few months. It wasn't just the start of a new job, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would be in control of my own destiny. The first few days at North Bay Solutions were a whirlwind. I spent my time meeting with my team, understanding the intricacies of our projects, and getting a feel for the company's rhythm. Everything felt right. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was in a space where I felt valued, where my opinions mattered, and where I wasn't just a cog in the machine. But that feeling of peace was soon interrupted when David called me into the conference room. The topic: Harbor Point. I had been in the industry long enough to know that when you're asked for your opinion in a meeting with an executive team, it's not just a casual chat. David made it clear that they were about to make a decision that would impact North Bay's long-term strategy, the renewal of our contract with Harbor Point. David, the CFO, and the CMO all sat around the table, waiting for me to speak. The tension was palpable. Here I was, not even a week into my new role, but already thrust into one of the most pivotal decisions North Bay would make this quarter. And of course, Harbor Point's future was tied to me. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting. There was a moment of silence as I considered how to answer. Part of me wanted to tear into Harbor Point, to expose everything they had done wrong and how they had treated me. This was my chance to give them a taste of the consequences of their actions. I could easily make the case for severing ties with them. After all, they were the company that had fired me, the company that had never recognized my worth, and the company that had kept me stuck in a position where I could never grow. But as much as I hated to admit it, Harbor Point still had potential. Their work was solid, despite the mismanagement and lack of support. They had talented people, and there was a chance that with the right direction, they could still be a valuable partner. I didn't want to let my personal feelings cloud my professional judgment. So, I did what I had always done. I thought about the bigger picture. I think we should evaluate Harbor Point just like we would any other partner, I said, keeping my voice steady. Their work has been solid, but consistency is key. Their account management is a concern. We need to look at whether they can provide the support and stability we require moving forward. David nodded, and I could tell that my perspective resonated with him. The team quickly agreed, and we spent the next few hours discussing the pros and cons of continuing with Harbor Point. The decision wasn't easy, but it was the right one. As we wrapped up the meeting, I felt a sense of satisfaction. This wasn't about getting back at Harbor Point. This was about making a choice that was best for North Bay. I had done what I came to do. I had remained professional, focused on the business, and put aside any personal vendettas. But even as I walked out of the conference room, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of the story. What I didn't know was that my decision would have consequences that would play out in ways I hadn't anticipated. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the email went out, the one that would inevitably change everything. The decision had been made. North Bay Solutions had decided to transition its account from Harbor Point to Meridian Creative, effective immediately. The email was concise, professional, and to the point. Nothing in it hinted at the storm brewing beneath the surface. I hadn't orchestrated the timing. I wasn't the one who had finalized the decision. That was all up to the executive team, but David had given me the courtesy of reviewing the draft before it was sent. I appreciated the transparency, though I had recused myself from the final decision-making process. It felt like the right thing to do, given my past with Harbor Point. I didn't want any suspicion of bias. The email was sent out at 11 a.m., and by the time I returned to my desk after a brief lunch, the buzz around the office had already started. Everyone knew about the decision. It didn't take long for word to get around that I had been part of it, and while I didn't mind the acknowledgement, I knew that the fallout from this decision would be anything but quiet. I sat down at my desk, opened my inbox, and immediately saw a message from Jessica, the receptionist at Harbor Point. She had sent a connection request on LinkedIn the night before, but I hadn't responded. I hadn't even checked my notifications, but now the message was there, waiting for me. The text was brief but telling. The office is in chaos. Victoria's been in emergency meetings all day. 3 other account managers have updated their resumes. Karma works fast. I didn't know how to feel in that moment. Part of me was satisfied, maybe even a little vindicated. I had watched Harbor Point take my efforts, my loyalty, and my hard work for granted for so long. But now, I wasn't the one who had hurt them. I hadn't sabotaged them. The consequences had come without me lifting a finger. Still, I didn't respond to Jessica right away. There was no need for me to get involved in Harbor Point's internal affairs anymore. That part of my life was behind me. My focus was on my new role at North Bay and the fresh challenges ahead. Success in my new position, that would be the best revenge. I didn't think much about it again until I received a call from David later that afternoon. He congratulated me on the successful transition and mentioned that the feedback from the executive team had been overwhelmingly positive. North Bay's reputation in the industry was solid, and the decision to switch agencies had been handled with tact and professionalism. But even as I spoke with David, I couldn't help but think of Victoria and Harbor Point. How would they react to the loss of North Bay? How would they explain it to the rest of their clients? What would their next move be? I couldn't deny that a part of me wanted to know how it all played out. But then I reminded myself, this wasn't my problem anymore. As the evening wore on, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, reflecting on the decision I had made earlier that day. I had handled it with professionalism, not out of spite, but because it was the right thing to do. As the city lights twinkled in the distance, I realized that the hardest part of my journey wasn't over, but I was finally in control of my narrative. The next morning, an email from North Bay's CFO confirmed that all was well. The transition had been smooth, and the Harbor Point account would officially be handled by Meridian Creative. For all the chaos that had erupted on the other side, I was at peace. I had come out of this on top, and that, I realized, was all that mattered. It had been a full week since the email went out, and by then, the ripples from the decision were already felt across the industry. Harbor Point was scrambling to figure out how to salvage its reputation. The loss of North Bay Solutions, a client responsible for nearly 30% of their revenue, hit harder than anyone anticipated. The news had spread like wildfire through the industry, especially among the agencies that had been eyeing that lucrative account. But for me, everything was quiet. The professional world had moved on, and so had I. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about proving anyone wrong. It was about reclaiming my power, my self-worth, and my career. Things I had almost forgotten after so many years of working at Harbor Point, hoping for recognition and fairness that never came. The following Monday, I arrived early at North Bay Solutions. ready to dive into my new role. There was no lingering bitterness, no need for closure or confrontation. What I had realized through all of this was that the best revenge wasn't in making someone else pay. It was in taking control of my own success, my own narrative. I walked into my new office, which, unlike my cramped cubicle at Harbor Point, was spacious, well lit, and had windows that overlooked the city. I let out a breath of relief as I sat down at my desk. This was mine. This was what I had worked so hard for. David, who had become both a mentor and a friend since I joined North Bay, stopped by to check in. He gave me a warm smile and an encouraging nod. "You're doing great, Addison," he said. "Your experience, your leadership, it's all exactly what we needed." His words meant a lot, more than I realized. It was exactly the validation I had been searching for, but had never received at Harbor Point. The team was great, too. I had 5 talented marketing specialists who were eager to work with me. We spent the morning discussing strategies, timelines, and future objectives. It felt good to finally be part of a team that recognized each other's contributions. The dynamic here was different, and I could feel it. North Bay was a place where success was built on collaboration and mutual respect, not ego and unfair expectations. That afternoon, David asked me to join him in a meeting with the executive team. We went over the next steps for our client accounts, and the topic of Harbor Point came up. "Addison, I just wanted to know your thoughts," David said, his tone respectful. "We're in the process of finalizing the contract with Meridian Creative, and we want to make sure we're making the right move for the future. You know the ins and outs of Harbor Point better than anyone. Is there anything we should consider moving forward?" I could have easily given them all the dirt, all the weaknesses I knew Harbor Point had, and I would have felt justified in doing so. But I didn't. I took a deep breath and offered my professional opinion. "I think we need to evaluate all agencies on the same criteria," I said. "Harbor Point has done good work in the past, but consistency is key. Account management is critical for the long-term success of any partnership, and that's something to think about moving forward." It wasn't about Harbor Point anymore. It wasn't about the revenge that might have felt good for a moment. It was about what was best for North Bay, a company that valued integrity, professionalism, and long-term relationships. That evening, as I walked out of the office, I felt a deep sense of peace. Not just because I had made the right choice for my career, but because I had taken the high road. I wasn't looking to hurt anyone. I wasn't seeking revenge. I had simply made a decision to move forward, to reclaim control over my own destiny. And that was the closure I had been looking for.